It is now 10 minutes after 2 o'clock. I'm Paul Krikorian, Chair of the Budget and Finance Committee. We are still waiting for other members to arrive to the committee before we begin. I'm going to wait a bit longer before we commence the meeting, but I just wanted to let any members know who happen to be in the building we're ready to begin. This is the regular meeting of the Budget and Finance Committee. I'm Paul Krikorian, Chair of the committee. I'm going to begin the meeting now, pending arrival of other members. If anybody would like to offer general public comment, please fill out one of these cards and bring it forward. As of right now, I have none. Given the fact that we do not have a quorum right now, I am going to hold items 1, 2, 3, and 4 for further consideration next week. And I'm going to begin today's agenda with item number 6. And I actually don't need to report on item number 6. I'm ready to recommend, as a chair's recommendation, that the refund be approved and that be advanced to council as a chair's recommendation. That brings us to item number 5. Let's start with item number 5.
Item number 5 is the fire department to present the verbal report relative to the status of the sworn constant staffing overtime account. The department's efforts to switch the fire dispatch center staffing to a 540 work schedule and efforts to seek reimbursements for ambulance transfer costs under AB 678.
Thank you. And by the way, for everybody who's heading out the door, my apologies. I apologize for the inconvenience. It's important that these matters be heard by the committee, so I appreciate your coming down. Thank you very much, and again, my apologies on behalf of the committee. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. I'm June Gibson with the Fire Department. I'll start on the status of the conversion to the 40-hour work schedule at the dispatch center. The department is working with the CAO for a report to the November 13th ERC meeting to discuss the status of impact bargaining, and the department will also at that time be requesting that the CAO's office participate with the department in those negotiation sessions. On the status of the constant staffing overtime account, expenditures are reported on a pay period basis. So the most recent information that we have available is for the pay period ending October 20th. Total expenditures on the constant staffing overtime account as of that date was approximately $30.7 million. The average expenditure is about $3.8 million per pay period. In our future reports, we're going to use this amount as the baseline to monitor the rate of expenditures in this account. And with regard to AB 678, the State Department of Healthcare Services is finalizing the cost report. It's anticipated that the final draft will be provided to the beta group for review by the end of this week or early next week.
Very good. We are joined by Mr. Englander, and Mr. Englander, I know that you're going to have some questions on this item. Are you
Yes.
ready to go?
Sure, absolutely. Thank you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I wanted to first start off with asking what the status was with the fire dispatch center and staffing on the 540. As indicated in previous discussions, there's a cost or at least a savings that's been identified of approximately $266,000 a month. And it's been indicated that while we're headed in the direction to pursue that, it may not be able to be initiated until sometime in April. Wanted to find out where we were on those efforts and what might be the delay.
What the department is targeting is to complete negotiations as soon as possible, which is one of the main reasons that the department is seeking the assistance of the CAO as part of the impact bargaining sessions. So after that is completed, we're hoping that it will draw to a close in the early part of 2013. And our goal is to try to implement by the first quarter of the calendar year.
Is that a meet and confer issue?
Yes, it's impact bargaining.
And you're saying that your hope is that it actually occurs sometime in the beginning of 2013?
Correct.
This was originally passed as part of the current budget, is my understanding, and I'm trying to figure out why. Are we close to impasse, or is it something that seems to be stuck somewhere, and why it's taking so long?
Well, with impact bargaining, there really is no impasse per se. UFLAC obviously has a concern about the conversion to the 40-hour schedule. What will be presented to the EERC for its November 13th meeting will be cost comparisons of UFLAC's proposal and the department's proposal. And that's an opportunity for the EERC to reaffirm the need to convert to the 40-hour schedule. There's also a variation in terms of, I believe what the department had proposed in the budget was that they could convert to a 40-hour schedule with the existing staffing level. And upon further review, the department determined that for efficiencies and for public safety purposes, it would be best to realign that staffing level to increase that staffing, and that's part of what will be presented to the ERC on the 13th.
And can you just address what's led to this point in terms of what's taken so long in the delay to bring it to ERC then?
I would say one of the challenges, council member, is that during the course of the year, when we first started looking at moving toward a 40-hour work week, and coinciding with that was also during the transition from our old dispatch center to our new dispatch center. As you're aware of, over that course of time, we've had some challenges with our CAD system as well as our fire station alerting system. During these time periods, it has required the full staffing level of our dispatch center in terms of the number of people that we have assigned there. Currently, every day we have 26 dispatchers assigned. Under the new proposed working model, that staffing level would be reduced. So as a result, the fire chief determined that rather than move toward that staffing level prematurely to ensure that we maintained a good working level in terms of public safety or service to the community, he held back in moving forward with that transition until we were ensured that our CAD system was stabilized and that we can move forward in that.
Well, and I understand, and it's been brought to our attention about some of the issues with the CAD system, and that has been shared. What wasn't shared was that this has not been implemented, and I don't believe we even found out that this is what caused those decisions to occur at that cost, which is a tremendous cost, until it came out in the FSR. Can you highlight perhaps why? And if it's just simply a matter of, it really doesn't answer the issue of if we're having some parallel concerns or issues for implementation where it had to be brought to ERC versus we had the technical issues on the CAD system. It sounds like we could have resolved at least one of them while we were fixing the technical issues. I'm trying to figure out why we are waiting to have one done before moving forward with the issues with UFLAC rather than having those resolved and being able to implement and flip the switch once the technological issues were resolved.
In terms of, you're asking why we didn't continue with the meet and confer process or the impact bargaining while we were trying to fix the technological component, is that what you're?
Correct,
Just to clarify. You're probably correct on that. We were in discussions with it, and we probably should have proceeded with it, but again, the fire chief decided that, again, rather than move forward with a possibility of not having the staffing level sufficient to handle any kind of CAD issues, that he delayed that process.
And then on the sworn constant staffing overtime account, that historically has been, more lately than recently, has been over budget. Those are, and as indicated from the conversations of the last committee, things that can be projected out. We know what those demands are, and why is it that we're over budget yet again when we know what the staffing levels need to be for sworn overtime? It was budgeted at the correct allocation, and yet here we are again faced with those same issues. If you can just address that. And what we're going to be doing to correct it, more importantly, or as importantly.
Well, I think that the department would have to disagree that the department was budgeted at the appropriate amount. The committee may recall that the fire chief did submit a letter to the Budget and Finance Committee during budget deliberations that the constant staffing overtime account was in fact under budgeted by $7 million. The chief, however, recognized that every department was under budgeted, and so he acknowledged that we were going to have to live within our means. And obviously, with the $7 million shortfall up front, that shortfall was compounded by not being able to convert the MFC from the platoon duty to the 40-hour work week. So, that was part of our presentation at last week's meeting, that recognizing that the net shortfall was going to be $5.2 million, that we were finding other opportunities in order to address that shortfall.
And then going back to, though, I think it couples well with the dispatch issues. How's the department planning on absorbing at least 1.7 million of that issue of not, that could have been used for constant overstaffing, and I think that's one of the things that the Budget Committee recognized as well because of that savings. How can that now be absorbed within the department?
The 5.2 million, you mean?
No, the 5.2 million as well, but I think they are, it's a married issue where we've got identified cost savings, and now we're, by January 1st, we'll be roughly 1.7 million into the 540 work schedule that could have stayed within the department. I think that was recognized. How does the department plan on absorbing those costs?
As reported last week, the fire chief was successful in being able to get agreement from the mayor's office as well as the executive director of Water and Power to reimburse the Department for Fire Services provided to Water and Power, and that will probably be the equivalent of $3 million. There are other revenue-generating opportunities that the department is pursuing, and we're hoping that that would be sufficient in order to address the $5.2 million shortfall.
If I could just respectfully look at that as an example of going to another department, particularly one that charges rates. DWP is collecting those rates from ratepayers, and so it's basically just passing those additional costs on from the fire department for, if you will, failure to implement those cost-saving measures to the ratepayers from DWP directly. And I don't know if that's really an appropriate measure. If they're looking at other additional revenue, if they're calling it new revenue, which is really just a pass-through to the ratepayers, what additional revenues are being talked about? Because I haven't heard additional ones I heard about that one recently. What are the additional ones that you're discussing?
The department is pursuing the false alarm fee.
Yes.
So,
Yeah, that was my emotion as well. We're looking at that one, and I'll go ahead and turn it over to my colleagues and come back to it.
Thank you. Mr. Kretz?
I think
Oh, I'm
Mr.
sorry, before you, we now have a quorum, Mr. Kretz, Mr. Englander, and myself.
I think Mr. Englander asked everything I was going to ask and more, so I have nothing else to ask.
Great, thank you. So, he did ask my questions as well, but I haven't asked him yet, so.
Please.
Let me just, one slight variation. You did mention that at the time of the budget discussions, the chief had indicated his anticipation that constant staffing was $7 million underfunded. But of course, this department and all other departments ultimately have to figure out a way to operate within what's available. But on top of that, we're now projecting an $11 million shortfall in constant staffing. So even with that, we're still coming up $4 million over what the chief anticipated just a few months ago when we were preparing the fire department's budget. So I do want to just observe that point first, but then second, I really need to have a better understanding, and I don't expect that you'll have chapter and verse now, but as we go through the course of this discussion and these regular updates, part of the point of this is to really understand what the strategy is for remedying the situation. It's not just for us to get weekly updates on what the numbers are, but how are we going to fix that $11 million hole? And what progress are we making on a regular basis towards meeting that? Because it's just, we don't have it. And so this committee really needs to understand what the department's specific plans are going forward for addressing that situation. And then we're going to try to measure progress towards achieving those goals. That's what my intention is. I think Mr. Englander covered the Fire Dispatch Center issue well. Let me just follow up with one thing. Chief, you indicated that there's that at the time of the transition, there were 26 dispatchers there per day. Was that for the 24-hour period or per shift, or how did that work?
That is correct. There's 26 dispatchers assigned per day for the 24-hour period.
Okay.
They're not on the floor for the entire 24 hours. They rotate a specific schedule that they're working.
So was the thinking then, as I understand it, the thinking was then to fill the phones, make sure you had enough dispatchers on the floor, but then also to have some cushion above that to deal with the the technical problems that you were trying to address?
Exactly. In looking at or evaluating the current dispatch center, we always wanted to build in a surge capacity so that if an event, either with the CAD system or a major emergency disaster such as an earthquake, heavy rains, any other type of incident that increases our call load, that we have the ability to staff additional people on the floor to take the 911 calls.
Okay, so the technical side is one issue. The unanticipated occurrence part of it is another part of that issue, and that unanticipated occurrence scenario remains true today. So even if the technical issues are resolved, then going forward with the switching over to the 540 work schedule, what would be the plan for making that work schedule work, given the fact that on any week of any year, there's the possibility of needing a surge in personnel?
In our current proposal that we're moving forward to, we have also built in a cushion to allow for a surge capacity. Well, we also have the ability that just in case we do have an event that is a prolonged event, that those individuals that are getting off, we can hire them back, keep them on to maintain an increased staffing level for a major catastrophic event.
Okay, so the department is satisfied that even on a 540 schedule, you can build in enough redundancy and enough surplus capacity that you can deal with those unanticipated, unusual circumstances?
That is correct.
Okay, very good. Mr.
One-
Kretz?
Just occurred to me, as long as we have you here, I got just one complaint from a constituent recently that they had an emergency and were getting a busy signal on 911 for a minute or two before they were able to get through. Are we having that problem with any frequency? Because my understanding was that we weren't.
When you say 911, just for clarification, the LAPD is the primary answering point for 911 calls. So when they call 911, it goes to LAPD Dispatch Center first. From there, if it's
Right.
determined to be...
But I thought you might have some greater awareness of what's going on over there.
Not that we're aware of. If you look at our call processing time in terms of answering phone calls, we answer our calls that are transferred to us from LAPD within 10 seconds about 96% of the time.
Okay, so presumably the problem would be at the other end of that.
It could be.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Englander?
Just real quick then, just based on the discussions. So on the overtime staffing, the fact that it was pointed out, we're still $4 million more than what was originally anticipated. What are we planning to do to, first of all, how did that occur? And then what are we planning to do to ensure that we're not going to go over even what the chief originally stated at the $7 million? And what's the differential? How do you calculate the differential? Why the additional $4 million on top of the $7 million?
I think what I indicated was the average expenditure per pay period is about $3.8 million. Is that what you're referring to?
And by asking is, if the chief originally said we're going to be $7 million over budget, or what's not budgeted for constant staffing overtime, and we're $4 million on top of that already, according to the latest FSR, that's a huge disparity. And that, how did that occur in terms of how are the calculations so far off from the original memo to the Budget and Finance Committee saying that they're going to be $7 million short if they maintain, don't correct for that issue, but yet it's an additional $4 million. How did that happen? And why?
I think it would be better if we were to be able to report back at the next meeting and to be able to provide you with more detailed information as to what has transpired between the beginning of the fiscal year and now relative to expenditures, and also to provide the opportunity to present to the committee as to how we're planning on balancing the budget and what savings have been accrued in other accounts that will allow the transfer of savings from those accounts to the constant staffing overtime and to ultimately balance the budget at the end of the fiscal year.
Okay, that would be great. I'd appreciate that. And then one final thing, as long as you're coming back, if you could also come back with any additional information on what exactly it is that we're going to be, the fire department will be charging back to DWP. I want to make sure if we're setting any precedent or things we haven't done, we're not opening up either Prop 218 issues because it's direct pass-through to the ratepayers, and or if it's even outlined directly in DWP's rate structure now, there could be some legal concerns. So we want to make sure that we're doing that appropriately if it can be done. And then the other issue that historically that's been suggested, is not the first time it's come up. It's never been implemented, but DWP's pushback from day one for many years publicly has been stated, so I'm only simply reiterating what their statement has been. I believe it's been that if the fire department wants to charge us for the services provided to us, then we'll go ahead and look at and allocate and charge the department back for the water they use out of the hydrants. I think statements like that have been stated by previous general managers, as you well know. So we'll want to make sure that if we do and can legally do what's being suggested, we've got assurances that it just doesn't become this fee for service back and forth that just escalates the cost to the ratepayers rather than dealing with the budgetary solutions that have been identified. So if you could bring that information back as well.
And we'll provide additional information, but just to alleviate the committee's concerns about the legality of the reimbursements, we did discuss the issue with the city attorney's office, and they're comfortable in terms of what we are being reimbursed for, but, as I said, we'll provide additional information.
And if you have anything in writing from the city attorney's office to submit, just so we have it on the record, it would be very helpful.
Provided it's not a confidential attorney-client communication that we don't want to have on the committees.
Right, we're not the client.
Yeah.
That's a whole nother issue.
Well, I don't want it on the public record whether we're the client or not. So if you could come back then on the next time around, and I guess we're dark next week due to the holiday. So in 2 weeks, if you could come back with the first written report that details those things, that would be helpful. And then I don't know that a written report will be necessary, and an update will be necessary, but at least as sort of a baseline report, it would be very helpful to the committee to have the points that Mr. England raised, and specifically a roadmap for how we're going to address the constant staffing, overtime, and the other issues as well. Okay? Thank you very much. Members, I had previously advanced item number 6 with Chair's recommendation. If either of you would need to hear anything about that, we can have it heard. Otherwise, I would recommend it as a consent item.
Number 6?
Number 6 is the refund claim,
And I'm sorry, the committee's was to approve the refund claim?
to approve the refund claim.
Absolutely.
Yes, that's fine.
Okay, so that, now that we have a quorum here, that will be the recommendation of the committee. That brings us to item number 7.
Item number 7 is a motion, Krikorian Koretz, relative to a contract amendment between the Los Angeles City Employees Retirement System Lacers and Lineal Solutions, Inc. to provide project management services for the duration of the Lacers Pension Administration System Replacement Project.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Lee C., Assistant General Manager from Lacers. With me, Thomas Ma, our IT Manager.
Good afternoon.
And this item before you was previously approved by our board, and we are seeking the final approval of the City Council based on our City Attorney's advice that this item, with amendment, the contract term and the annual payment will exceed the thresholds of the board's authority. And the original contract is for this consultant, Linear Solutions, to provide the project management service for our pension administration system for an estimated period of 24 months. But recently, in early September, our board already selected the vendor for this system. And this vendor calls for an implementation period of 36 months plus 3 months of a parallel. And so we're just requesting the amendment to extend the contract for this consultant to be consistent with the contract with the vendor, and so we have the full coverage of the project management.
Thank you. Members? Mr. England?
I just have a quick question on this. I don't have a problem with it, but is there an obligation, a general fund obligation on this?
No, there's none. So this is funded by our trust fund asset.
That's covering, I'm not talking about the $10 million, I know that is, but the extension of the $400,000, the contract?
Yes.
That's also,
Yes.
there's no general, because there's no CAO report on this at all, so there's no financial impact?
Yeah, typically the Lacers contracts do not come to the City Council for approval, as the board has jurisdiction over those contracts, and so there wouldn't be a CAO report in those instances.
But in this case, there is.
In this
Coming
case,
to the council, so
there is, but it was brought forward through motion, and it doesn't, that did not trigger the usual Executive Directive 5 review process.
Okay.
Mr. Kretz?
Yeah, I'm just curious, has any kind of study been done to give us a rough idea how much we'll save by implementing these efficiencies?
We didn't have a quantitative analysis of the dollar amount savings. So this is basically we want to replace our current pension administration system, and this system has been used for 12 years, and then the board consider that it's time for us to replace this because the technology of the current system is considered obsolete. It's going to be hard to maintain, and then so the board back in 2009 included this as a strategic initiative to implement this. We don't have an exact number of savings, but we do know the consequences of not replacing the system. If we don't replace the system, though, we will not be able to maintain and support our pension operation.
I do assume that we've analyzed this enough to be confident that we will save the $10 million at least in efficiencies. If not, it would be hard to justify moving forward with it.
And first of all, the $10 million is an estimated amount, and the exact contract is like $5.9 million. And with this contract, we're still negotiating with the contract. We hope to have a smaller amount. And we went through this an RFP process. So this is the lowest bid that we got from all the proposals.
Well, I'm not sure I got an answer to my question, but it sounds like it's outdated enough that we don't have too much choice. So there's probably no way to continue updating the existing system and make that a financially viable choice, I take it.
Yeah, the technology that we're
And
utilizing.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but could you please both identify yourself and your positions for the record?
My name is Thomas Ma. I'm the Information Systems Manager at Lasers.
At Lasers, thank you.
The technology that we're using right now for the current pension software version, it's the LRS Pension Gold version 2.8. It's a decade-old technology. It's using Delphi technology, and as you remember, it's the old Pascal technology. So in year 2008, the vendor did inform us during that time that they would no longer support us. And then later on, they turned around and they did say that their support, but they'll continue to try to have their clients, upgrade and move to the newer version. So it's a big risk, if we don't move from this old technology into the new technology, into the new version. So as Lee had mentioned, we've gone through a very lengthy process. It was a phase 1 to phase 4 process that we've gone through a very thorough requirements gathering process, of over 7 months with over 60% of the subject matter experts at Lasers, going through it, formulating over 1,500 business processes in there, over 700 pages. So it's very thorough. We also went through a due diligence process as well, to having, the conference calls that we made out to 4 clients per vendor. We also visited the sites as well, of the pension software that that had made their proposals as well. So we went through a very lengthy process, and we got these proposals in, and this LRS Pension Gold version 3 made a whole lot of sense, with the cost factor, with being able to fulfill the necessary requirements that we had defined in our 300 pages of RFP that we had developed with Linear Solutions as our project manager, from phase 1 to phase 4.
We did not quantify the dollar value of the efficiency that we're going to achieve with the new system, but we do know certain areas we can have a better efficiencies. Like, currently we're running a retirement payroll, and it will take us 2 hours or 3 hours to run, and we have to hold the operation, and because the system is going to be running. But with that new system, the payrolls can be run behind the scene at the same time that our employees are working. So we cannot quantify that, but that's a saving.
It's tech, oh, sorry.
Yeah, if I may, were you done, Mr. Krebs?
Yeah, I think that's a satisfactory answer.
So I understand that ITA was asked to review the project to ensure consistency with the city's IT standards. I'd like ITA to come forward and offer any comments that you would like about the proposed contract, the status of the project, and also whether the project was reviewed by the Council's Information Technology Oversight Committee and what the results of that review were. Welcome.
Good afternoon, council members. Mark Wolf with the Information Technology Agency. With me is Sylvia Bergstrom, also from ITA, who she manages the city's payroll system and other financial systems that we operate. ITA did meet with Lacer's management and discuss the scope of services, discuss the overall project, legacy replacement project, as well as the scope of services related to the project management services specifically. We are in agreement with the need for services that they've outlined. In regards to discussion, our discussions also included some additional areas where we recommended adding some funding that would be utilized for additional contracting services for integrating Pacer, our city payroll system, with this pension administration system. So that's something that our colleagues at Lacer's indicated that they will ensure that that funding is in place to be able to support that work as well.
Okay. But that's separate from the scope of this
Correct.
RFA?
Correct. This is strictly for project management services, and we do agree that these services are required and vital for the management of this project.
Okay. Anything further, members? All right. Then, actually, the motion itself calls upon the council to consider this contract in the moving paragraph. So I would recommend that the committee approve the motion as amended to replace the word consider with approve. And without objection, that'll be the action of the committee. All right. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
That brings us to item number 8.
Item number 8 is City Administrative Officer reports relative to the status of position freeze requests submitted for Managed Hiring Committee review approval for the months of July and August 2012. The Personnel and Animal Welfare Committee noted and filed these items on October 16, 2012, and the committee also instructed the CEO to report back on the feasibility of eliminating 100% special funded positions from the Managed Hiring Committee review approval process.
All right, and we do have one card on that matter. That's Michael Davies. Mr. Davies, if you'd like to come forward. Good afternoon.
Afternoon. Thank you kindly. I realize this is typically an informational item, but I would like to encourage this committee to continue on the same path as personnel animal welfare in terms of investigating, giving serious consideration to exempting fee-based 100% positions from the Managed Hiring Committee process. Managed Hiring Committee is another valve that's been placed into the budget pipeline, which has been used to further starve resources from key areas in the city. I realize there are many departments that are general fund based that are still in a difficult situation in terms of meeting their budgets, even as adopted. But in special funded or fee-based, we are, as a city, we're demanding more and more of our employees who remain behind for those who weren't able to retire or weren't able to find other opportunities. The rare times that we can actually provide them with some material incentive, such as through pay grade advancement, those are getting starved and strangled off. And if there's some way that we could enable even things as simple as what used to be routine pay grade advancements as a means of acknowledging, rewarding the additional efforts of our staff. Staffing levels are down to where they were in the early 90s in some departments, what they were in the mid 80s. I was around during those days. And again, if there's some way of, within budget and where there are special funds, enabling pay grade advancements or in some case promotions to be made without affecting the general fund portion of the city budget, I certainly would encourage that on behalf of our members. The situation in scientific investigations in LAPD, which is not special funded, is also a matter of great concern to us, where, again, an area starved for resources, huge backlogs to try to deal with, in this case, property crime backlogs. If we can do anything, we would appreciate it in terms of acknowledging the efforts of our members.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. Oh. I thought you were getting up to go.
No. Ben Stehout, the CEO, here to go over the two reports that are before you. As noted in the opening remarks there, these two items have gone to the PAWS committee where additional instructions recommendations were made. But just to go back a bit, the Managed Hiring Committee has been around for a couple of years already. During the last budget cycle for the 12-13 budget, we were asked to report to this committee and to PAWS committee with the status of requests made to the committee from departments, what has been approved, what is on hold, and what is pending CEO review. So what you have before you are the stats for July and for August that basically show you that information. One column showing one table showing the number of requests and another table showing the number of positions requested. And as you can see, there has been over the course of July a great preference, so to speak, on the special funded positions that have been requested. A significant amount in July, mostly due to requests made by the Bureau of Sanitation and some of the other public works bureaus. And in August, again, there were a significant number of positions requested, but the numbers skew a little bit more towards the general fund because in that month we had a significant number of police requests made, mostly for sworn positions. So given the requests made in a particular month, that's going to skew the results relative to the percent of the approvals made for either general fund or special funded positions. But in general, what the committee's been able to do is to provide a greater amount of certainty to departments relative to when their items will be held in considered in committee. Whereas in prior fiscal years, departments could have submitted a request in 1 month and not heard back for several months. Now we have provided departments with a greater level of certainty that if they meet the required deadlines for making a submission to the office, to the CAO, and if our analysts are able to get all their questions answered relative to those positions, then that item will be scheduled in managed hiring at the next available meeting time, and will be acted on, whether it's an approval, a deny, or whether we're going to send it back to the department for additional information. And that's been the intent in this fiscal year with Managed Hiring Committee, is making sure the departments understand where they're kind of making it more transparent for departments to know where in the process their positions are and whether or not they are being considered for an unfreeze. With respect to the special funded positions, I do want to make a point that while there is not a 100% exemption on all special fund positions, we have worked with most of the departments that have 100% funded special funded positions, and that's 10 of those departments, or actually 9 of those departments and a couple of departments that have specific units that are either special funded or of high priority, where we have provided a hiring plan for those departments, where they will have a authority to hire to a certain minimum level. So if they have 10 investigators in the Bureau of Street Services, or they can hire up to say 5 without having to get any approvals from managed hiring. So they have so if they go below that 5, they could hire back up to get to that minimum threshold. If that And we have that agreement with a number of other departments. Just to go down the list, there's an agreement with the street lighting, Bureau of Street Lighting, Bureau of Sanitation, Department of Transportation and their Parking Enforcement Division, Bureau of Street Services, the Housing Department for their rent and code, the the Building and Safety Department for their enterprise-funded positions. We have just recently approved the hiring plan for planning that will allow them to hire in their zoning administration and their some much-needed GIS positions. We've recently also approved the hiring plan for the Recreation and Parks Department. And we also have even though this is a general fund unit, in the city clerk's office for the elections division, as well as we have the ongoing hiring goals in the police department sworn unit that getting to the 9963 and maintaining at that level based on prior budget approvals. So those are the areas where we have some level of understanding and actual agreements with the departments as to what the hiring plans will be for the remainder of the fiscal year for those special funded areas.
Thank you. Mr. Kretz?
Yeah, I know we discussed this in Personnel Committee, but I still fail to see any value in maintaining managed hiring for the specially funded positions. So could you explain again why we're still clinging to that approach on 100% special funded positions when those can only help us fulfill our needs to supply services more effectively, since we can't cover everything that we'd like in general funds, but if we have the money and we have the positions, why would we add the extra delay?
Karen Kalfine with the CLA's office. Actually, there are a number of reasons. One is on the special funds, too. We also don't want to get into a situation where we're creating a problem with this within a special fund if there's 100% unfreeze for them. For example, if they were exempt, that's one reason. Another reason, too, is that we're also managed hiring is able to look at things and ask departments to look at them as transfer opportunities. So if there are potential for layoff in the future, that those positions could be available, in particular the more general classifications, so that those could be used as placement opportunities. So we work together with that, and then also notify the personnel department so that they can keep those in mind as well. And then there are some other departments, and more specifically the grant-funded departments, where the funding at the federal level could be an issue later on. And so rather than exempting them, want to look at them on a case-by-case basis until we have some clarity as to what the funding is going to be from the federal side.
That's my only question.
Well, when it comes to grant-funded positions, though, couldn't they still be filled with resolution authorities? I mean, I get that you don't want to necessarily hire a permanent person on when that funding is not going to last the duration of their career, but why can't we fill those with resolution authorities?
And in some cases we do, but for example, with the community development block grant, the funding year is a different year, so we could actually have a funding issue sometime before the end of our fiscal year. So that's something that we look to as well. We just don't want to create a situation where we have more people on board than the fund will allow. If, for example, next year, that's one of the areas that's looked at the federal level for reductions, and I believe that's one of the things in the sequestration, if I'm correct.
That's right. That's why it's precisely why for the housing departments, while we have an agreement with them for the rent and code, which are fully fee supported, we have asked for them to submit on the CDBG and home funded positions for them to continue submitting those to manage hiring because of that potential risk.
So I get that there's value in this process, but the countervailing, detriment is that we continue to have significant loss of services. We continue to have significant, perhaps, loss of generated revenues, even in revenue-producing positions, and so on. So I think for me, the goal would be to make sure that we expedite the process as much as we can, make it as easy for departments as we can, while still fulfilling those benefits, and that we be as flexible as possible in ensuring that those special funded, grant funded positions, particularly where there's revenues involved or public safety concerns involved, that we grant those requests at the highest rate rather than at the lowest rate. And I guess the one thing that I don't really see in the reports as they're presented, and you spoke to this a little bit, Mr. Ceja, but one of the comments that I most frequently hear from departments is this uncertainty, and that requests go in and that there's delay and so on. And you spoke to the fact that there's an effort made to make progress in that area. I think when these reports are prepared for us, if there's some way that you can capture the data of, how long this time process taking, for example, with these matters that are on hold, what does that mean exactly? How long have they been on hold? And, when will they be not on hold anymore? What exactly does that mean? And the same thing with CAO review. Just if we can get some sense of, are we talking about 90 days? Is it a year? Is it more? That would be helpful for us to know that we're making progress and trying to move the ball forward and expedite these considerations. That would be my request as well. Mr. Englander.
Okay, thank you. I'd actually like to take it, if we could, a little bit of a step further, particularly as we look to $16 or so million deficit to finish this year, and going into a $225 million budget deficit next year. It's projected to be out, I think, $350 the following year. I don't see the city anytime soon actually hiring to fulfill positions that aren't special funded. And as I think we've laid off 5,000 or so positions in the last several years. This is going to be really a critical, mandatory way that we do fill these services, particularly as was mentioned by the chair, the revenue producing and public safety positions that are so important. And if they are special funded or grant funded, now grant funded may be a little different as suggested, because there could be a matching component. We are under auditing for the grant that we're providing that service, and there's a little different scrutiny. But if it's a special funded position, particularly those that cover the obligations for health care and pension, or if it's revenue producing, is there another model that you would suggest in terms of streamlining this? Is there something else where we can treat the special funded and or grant funded positions, even if we came up with that priority as was just suggested by the chair? I think that makes a lot of sense. Those that are revenue producing and or public safety in nature. Is there another type of process that, because I understand what you're saying is we still have to manage it. That's where a lot of the reason, quite frankly, we've gotten to where we're at is because a lot of it wasn't managed. But we also have the other part of that management function where general managers, if they don't manage, hopefully they're held accountable for that. But is there another way you would suggest, perhaps, that we could streamline?
I think what we have done this fiscal year with some of the bureaus and some of the departments in terms of sitting down with those departments, doing a thorough analysis of their fees and their revenue and the positions they need to maintain those fees, to provide the services that those fees are paying for. I think that is the best option. It's not the quickest options per se, but it's the best option in terms of getting an agreement between the CAO, the CLA, the mayor's office, and the department that, yes, this is the minimum level of staffing that we need to fulfill the budget that we've been granted for this fiscal year.
Well, I understand that part of it. I'm sorry. Let me be a little, I don't think I asked the question from what I was thinking. Let me try to rephrase it. Just as it pertains to the special funded positions that are out of the general fund and are supported by either those special fees or their revenue producing or grants, is there something outside of the managed hiring process or a way to streamline just those positions, because we don't have to worry about them as much from a budgetary perspective? I'm not suggesting we lose control over them. Is there a way to streamline them to make those more efficient and effective so we can get those folks on board sooner?
I think having that hiring plan for those departments was at least one attempt to do that. I think what could have been done is that if the departments had submitted those plans earlier, then we could have had something in July rather than in September for them to work with. Because I think that has worked well. I mean, I imagine the departments could give some input on this, but I think that worked well. Is that once they know what they're working with, what their plan is for the year, and they don't have to come back to manage hiring for all these other things. So to have something like that earlier in the fiscal year, I think would probably be the one thing that could be done to improve that aspect of it.
Because you had made you said earlier in your comments that sometimes the special funds also run a deficit.
That's right. And that's why we want to still have an opportunity to look at those so that you don't build in a structural deficit in a special fund because there's an open end on hiring. I think we want to preserve some flexibility, not only for the departments, but also, in case there's some funding issue or if there's, for example, some displacement issues that need to be addressed, then those are places that could be looked at.
And under the managed hiring, does the committee look at or prioritize which positions first in terms of the revenue producing positions and public safety positions?
Well, we look at what the departments make the departments that are making the request, that's what we consider, is we basically take it that the department that is making the request knows best as far as what positions they're asking for to be unfrozen. And based on the requests that come in, we'll look at those requests at their based on the information they provide. So we don't try to make a determination that, planning these, we're not going to review these requests because we don't feel they're the priority of your department. If that's what the department submitted, then that's what we're going to review based on the information that's provided to us.
And do they rank them? Do they put down whether they're revenue, and not just fee supported, but revenue producing?
Yeah, they'll make their case.
Between
they definitely make
revenue producing.
Yes, so they'll definitely make their case as to why filling these positions and freezing these positions is important for the department and for the city, and they'll indicate as asked what does it mean for their revenue, what does it mean whether or not these positions have any, even if they're special funded, if there's a general fund subsidy being provided. And if so, what's the plan for them to slowly, get off the general fund if that's the case?
Okay. And then the last question on that then, and the follow-up is, are the departments doing a pretty good job for the most part in providing all that detail?
It's gotten better from when we started, yes.
Okay, so that tells me it
some
wasn't always
departments,
the case.
No, some departments are definitely more sophisticated in terms of what they're able to provide us because of, they just have that much more level of staffing available to them than others. But
is there a dialogue back with the department in letting them know what's expected, and so they have clear understanding of how they can be prioritized and submit? Because we get a lot of frustration from a lot of departments that say, we've got this, it's fee supported, or it's revenue producing, or it's grant funded, and we have a surplus, not a deficit, in that particular program, and we just can't get it moved out of managed hiring. I'm wondering if perhaps they're not of an understanding or being, you said some are more sophisticated than others, trained or taught or explained exactly how to get their positions moved to the front of the line. Is there something we should be doing better to help? Is there anything we could do to help?
I mean, the CEO analysts do provide kind of the information that we request, the request for information back to the departments as far as the managed hiring is asking for a more thorough presentation relative to their hiring plan. And how do they expect to stay within budget if they go forward with all these hires? I mean, those questions get back to the departments, and then it's up to them to figure out how best to explain that. But I don't think there is any formal kind of what you're describing in terms of that's been actually formalized into how we can better help the departments make the request.
I think what we've tried to do is when there's some, there's a lack of clarity on a request, that we try to say what the questions are, and that's communicated in a timely way back to the departments. I think, to the extent that we can make some more improvements on that so that we kind of open those communication lines, I think that's something we could do a little more of.
Okay, thank you.
So on that score, maybe I'm not 100% clear on this, but so in attachment 2, of the 598 positions that were requested, 373 were approved, 26 are on hold, and 194 are pending CAO review. So that 220 or so positions, did each department get a communication back on each of those 220 positions as to why it's being held, what additional information is required? And if it's not a matter of lack of information or lack of review, then wouldn't it just be a denial?
No,
What's the difference, in other words, between those 5 that were denied, the 26 that are on hold, and the 194 that are awaiting review?
Part of it is timing. So again, this is the monthly stat. So what the department could have done is, the last week of August, for example, they made a submission for managed hiring. So it's counted as it being submitted in August, but maybe the next managed hiring meeting wasn't until the following week in September. So it would have been counted as part of the positions requested, and it most likely would have been captured in the pending CEO review because of when it was submitted and the time it takes for analysts to actually review those submissions. So there is a time lapse between when we actually receive it and count it versus when it goes to managed hiring committee.
Okay.
And I think that's important just to remind the committee what the process is. A department will make a request, and the first stop will be the CAO's office for the CAO analyst to review it. Once that's done, then it's sent to the managed hiring committee for consideration. So a lot of times you'll hear a department say, managed hiring hasn't approved it yet or hasn't looked at it yet. It may be in that interim where the CAO is looking at it, and that's a valuable part of the process because they're able to look at it from the funding, to determine if there are any issues on that side, and then managed hiring can take that information and consider it too.
So how long does that CAO review process typically take?
It depends. It depends on the workload of the analyst. If it's during an FSR, kind of building of an FSR, so to speak, it could take a little bit longer because their priority is getting the FSR out.
Of course.
And there's also sometimes when not just the budget analyst has to review, but our employee relations division needs to review as well, because the department may be making a request for an unfreeze related to pay grade advancements or to some reallocation of a position or anything that's more employee relations related that requires a second level review, not just from the budget analyst, but also from the employee relations division to ensure that that's something within our past practices and falls within the guidelines of our employee relations practices and procedures.
Okay. All right. Well, we can talk further offline about what additional ways we can present this information, but I guess my concern is that, if you have 194 positions that are pending CAO review, and those have all been submitted within the last 2 or 3 weeks, that's great. But if they've been pending CAO review for anywhere from a couple weeks to 6 months, then that tells us a different story of, where we might need to address it. And likewise, the on-hold positions and the issues of communication back with the departments about getting the additional information that managed hiring may need to be able to present. But we can talk about that further.
We'll look at what the data that we collect to see how best we can provide that information in future reports.
Please, and then if you and my staff can just talk about how we can present that for the next report, that would be information that would be useful, I think, for all the committee members to have, to understand where the delay is and where, if anywhere, the process can be expedited. I don't presuppose that it can be. I mean, I don't mean to suggest that, we're not doing everything that we can right now, but it would just be helpful for us to have the complete picture, because as Mr. Englander has pointed out, I think there's a lot of concern on the part of departments about that, and if it might just simply be a matter of if they're not having adequate information about how the process is evolving too. So anyway, with that, if there's nothing further, colleagues will note and file the report. Thank you very much, and I think that concludes our business for the day. Mr. Seha, does it?
That's it.
All right. There's no other cards, so we are adjourned.